So our reading this week was Matthew 26 all the way through Mark 2. Did you read anything interesting this week? Yeah, you do. Ms. June said you find something new every time you read it. That's the truth, isn't it? I'm going to share, this is what we're going to try to do each week. Trying to think about, as I said, this is the first time I've ever done this. And so I've not heard of other people doing it except for my dad. And so I'm trying to figure out the best way to do this. 5 chapters is a lot to cover. It's impossible to cover in one class setting. So this is what I'm going to try to do. Starting tonight, I've got a couple of questions that we're going to address. I encourage you to keep on doing that. That way I know that we're covering what you want to cover. But I'm going to share not my favorite thing, but something that really struck me and made me think while I was reading this text this week. Now let's start with Matthew 26, and we'll try to do this in order. In Matthew chapter 26, and as you read this, I hope that you read it enough that maybe a picture will start developing in your mind of what it may have looked like and just the scene that was there. And as you read, strive to do that. We're not reading fairy tales. This actually happened, and these were actual people. They were in an actual room, and these things took place. And so try to visualize as you read what we're reading. In Matthew chapter 26, how many times already did you read, as you read through the book of Matthew, that Jesus begins to tell even his own disciples, this is coming. I've got to go to Jerusalem. I've got to suffer many things. I've got to die, and I'm going to rise from the dead. I'm going to be raised from the dead. I've got to do this. Peter, remember as we talked about, took him aside, said, no, that's not going to happen. That's when he says, get behind me, Satan. And it seems, in our reading from last week, James and John, hey, when you come into your kingdom, put us on positions of power so we can tell other people what to do. And they're not getting this. But then here in our reading this week, we have this lady who seems to get something that even his closest disciples did not get. In Matthew chapter 26, start with me in verse 6. I know you've read this already at least 5 times, and maybe probably 7, so let's read it an 8th time. Matthew 26, verse 6. And when Jesus was in Bethany at the house of Simon the leper, a woman came to him having an alabaster flask, a very costly fragrant oil, and she poured it on his head as he sat at the table. Now again, you get this scene. There he is sitting down, and this woman comes in. She has this flask, and she begins to pour this very fragrant oil on the head of Jesus. But look at verse 8. But when his disciples saw it, they were indignant, saying, why this waste? For this fragrant oil might have been sold for much and given to the poor. But when Jesus was aware of it, where do we learn that came from? Who was really the instigator of that? Judas was. And it tells us what he was really thinking. Yeah, he carried the money back. Did he really care for the poor? No. But when Jesus was aware of it, he said to them, why do you trouble the woman? For she has done a good work for me. For you have the poor with you always, but me you do not have always. For in pouring this fragrant oil on my body, she did it for my burial. Surely I say to you, wherever this gospel is preached in the whole world, what this woman has done will also be told as a memorial to her. Now there's so much we can talk about in this. There's another memorial that takes place in Matthew 26. We know this one well. What is that? The Lord's Supper. It's a memorial feast. But there's another memorial, and the memorial in this case was this woman. What was her name? Here she comes in. Now, Jesus knew why she was doing this. What did he say was the reason for it? For his burial. As we know what happens to a body after it dies, we understand that. Now, later on, you read in some of the other accounts that after, well, let's just back up. Let me ask the question. What were the women going to the tomb to do when they discovered that it was empty? Replenish that? What did you say, Bob? To anoint his body. That's right. He was already dead. They were going to roll away the stone and anoint his body again to try with oil. Now, here's the question. And this is a powerful, powerful lesson. As a matter of fact, don't be surprised if it comes to a pulpit near you soon. Both of those are beautiful acts, aren't they? Taking care of a lifeless body that can't appreciate it anymore. That's a beautiful act. I appreciate those that went to do that at the tomb. But when should we break our alabaster box? Right now. Are there things in your life that need to be corrected? When's the best time to do that? Right now. Are there people in your life that you need to tell that you love them? When's the best time to do that? Right now. Because what happens, before long, they're gone. And it's too late. I love this woman, what she does, because she does it in a time when Jesus can still appreciate it. He knows exactly what she's doing. You think he appreciated it? Leave her alone. Leave her alone. She knows what she's doing. That's right. Told his disciples, hush up. She knows what she's doing. I love that woman.
Martin,
yes.
The art that being told throughout the Christian dispensation to the ends of the world. Go online and Google this passage. Look how many hits you get.
Really?
Millions.
That's interesting. And you know, these he said, you talk about this account, and it talks about it being a memorial till the age of the Christian dispensation, till the end of the world. He said, go online and Google it and see how many hits this text gets. Millions and millions. People are interested in it. Here's this woman. These simple acts that people do, they mean a lot to us, don't they? You think this meant a lot to Jesus? Well, obviously it did. And so here we are talking about her 2,000 years later. It's a beautiful thing. Are women important in the church?
Yes.
And I'll tell you something. I think she just amened her own answer, didn't she? She said yes, and then very.
Very.
I agree with that.
Where do you think preachers get their sermons?
Careful, now you're stepping on my toes. In all seriousness, and this is not patronizing at all, but I think the older I get, the more I appreciate this, the more I understand this, even in my own life and my girls and sisters in Christ. You know, God made us different for a reason, and one of those reasons is you guys, the ladies, think of things that don't usually cross our minds. And it's those touches in life that just make life so much better. And I'll use this as an illustration. I might get in trouble for this, but I'm leaving for India tomorrow, and so is she going to get mad? She can be mad from thousands of miles away. And she won't get mad at this. I wouldn't use it if I thought she would. But you know, we moved into our new house in August, and all the walls were bare and all of these things. And you know, she was looking forward to decorating. I said, oh, it looks fine the way it is. You know, we've got a couch. That room's empty in there, but one's enough. Well, maybe we do need a couch. We're going to have some people over. She wants to start putting things on the walls. See, these bare walls, they're freshly painted. They look fine. And, you know, but by and by, she didn't listen to me. And Amazon became our best friend, delivering things once a paycheck. You know, she had a limit. But you know, it's nearly done now. And I look around and I thought, man, this place looks nice. And it looks so much better. And here I was content just to sit in an empty house, but I'm glad. That's right. And it's those little touches in life, and it's so much more than that. Don't think I'm just limiting them to this little, but it's those touches in life that just make life so much better for everybody. And this is one of those cases, isn't it? Jesus was going to die for us anyway. He was going to go to the tomb. He was going to be buried. But this right here, none of those men thought about this, and they were his closest disciples. But this woman did. One of the questions that I have it typed out just like it was sent to me, in Matthew 26, verses 56 through 58, says Peter is generally understood to be the archetype of spiritual cowardice. But verse 56 makes clear that all disciples abandoned Jesus, and indeed Peter was the only one brave enough to follow. Should we be broadening our view of Peter to more precisely observe that all abandoned, but it was Peter alone who was able to muster the strength to follow while acknowledging his later failures? All right, let's read Matthew 26, 56 through 58. And I don't know if you call all of that. In other words, if I can put it in my own words, we get on Peter because he denied the Lord 3 times, just like Jesus said that he would. But what about these other disciples? They forsook him, but Peter was closer. All right, now let's watch this. I'm glad this question was asked because I learned something this week. Learn something every week, but this I should have known. Look at Matthew 26, verses 56 through 58. All this was done. I'll start with verse 57. And those who laid hold of Jesus led him away to Caiaphas, the high priest, where the scribes and the elders were assembled. But Peter followed him at a distance to the high priest's courtyard, and he went in and sat with the servants to see the end. Now when the chief priests, the elders, and all the council saw false testimony against Jesus, put him to death, found none, so on and so forth. And then it begins to happen with Peter. Let's look at a couple other passages. If Matthew and other writers of the gospel had been imposters, they would never have written this part of the report that we're going to read. Look at John 18. Now, don't go any further with that, because that seriously is my sermon when I get back. Do not go any further with that. I normally don't cut people off, but what did I say? John 18. Forget what he just said. Keep moving. John 18. Now keep in mind what we're thinking about here. Peter, this source, everybody else forsook him, or did they? John 18, starting with verse 15. And Simon Peter followed Jesus, and so did another disciple. Now that disciple was known to the high priest and went with Jesus into the courtyard of the high priest. But Peter stood at the door outside. Then the other disciple, who was known to the high priest, went out and spoke to her who kept the door and brought Peter in. Then the servant girl who kept the door said to Peter, "You are not also one of this man's disciples, are you?" He said, "I am not." Talking about Peter. Now the servants and officers who had made a fire of coals stood there, for it was cold, and they warmed themselves, and Peter stood with them and warmed himself. Was there somebody else, a disciple with Jesus there? With Peter there? Yeah. So John was there. Most likely John. Now watch Mark chapter 14. I'm not answering the question yet, but we're getting there. Mark 14, 51 through 52. Mark 14, starting with verse 51. And I trust you just the context, the prayer in the garden, he was arrested, and so on and so forth. Look at verse 51. Now a certain young man followed him, having a linen cloth thrown around his naked body. And the young men laid hold on him, and he left the linen cloth and fled from them naked. So after the arrest of Jesus, verse 50 says, they all forsook him and fled. Now a certain young man followed him, having a linen cloth. So somebody followed Jesus, had this linen cloth around him, cloth and ran away without any clothes on. So someone else followed him for a little bit, didn't they? Who do you think this was? We talked about this in our men's class yesterday. I think it's Mark as well. John Mark, the one who wrote this book. So, that doesn't answer the question, but it does tell us something. Peter was there, most likely John, and most likely Mark. Somebody was there, started to follow him as well. What did Peter do that these others did not do? He denied. But here's the question. What did Peter do after he denied? When he finds out that Jesus is raised from the dead, what does he do? Runs to the tomb, joins himself again with the disciples. He was already there in the room with them. Here's why I love the Apostle Peter. Number one, because a lot of us can relate to him better than we can the rest of them, can't we? You ever speak before you think? But hear this. In my estimation, and that's all it is, the most difficult thing was for Peter to go back. Remember what he had said? Though all others forsake you, I never will. Though I die with thee, I will not forsake thee. Imagine saying that in front of everybody here. You can expect it from everybody else. But me, Lord, you know you can count on me. That I'm the one that verbally denies him. The easiest thing would be is to never darken these doors again, rather than face the rest of you. But what does Peter do? He comes back. I love him for that, don't you? And so if we are giving him too hard of a time, what he did was wrong. There's no doubt about it.
Well, also, I mean, before Christ said, when he realized, he said he wept bitterly.
He ran out and wept bitterly.
He went out and wept bitterly.
What's the difference between what he and Judas did? Yeah. Love the Apostle Peter. Let's look at another question. Make sure we get these in. Matthew 27, verse 19. Absolutely. Sister Moser says yes, and I'm going to agree with her.
That's what I say too.
Right in the face.
That's right.
Well, I've often wondered what was the look on Jesus.
Yeah.
It wasn't hatred,
No.
because it caused Peter to walk.
Cry bitterly.
Yeah. And you remember, we're in Mark now. We're at the end of Mark. We're getting ahead, but this is good. You remember when Jesus raised from the dead, who did he specifically ask to be told? Go tell Peter and the disciples.
And they said something. The worst thing that God could say to you on the judgment day.
Question is, what's the worst thing God could say to you on the judgment day?
You disappointed me, son.
Yeah.
I don't want to hear that.
He said, you disappointed me, son. We don't want to hear that. All right, Matthew 27, verse 19. Here's a question. Would it be appropriate to believe that the Spirit troubled Pilate's wife in her dream to ensure that it was the nation of Israel that demanded Jesus' crucifixion and not the singular and secular Pilate? That's a great question. In the ancient times, in the ancient nations, and Jews as well, dreams were considered as indication of either divine pleasure in difficult cases. Let's look at a few things. Look at 1 Samuel chapter 28, verse 6. Among the Jews, it was a mode of revelation. And I got this, some of this from the commentary, the Gospel Advocate commentary. 1 Samuel 28, verse 6. And when Saul inquired of the Lord did not answer him, either by dreams or by Urim and the prophets. Drop down to verse 15. Now Samuel said to Saul, why have you disturbed me by bringing me up? And Saul answered, I am deeply distressed, for the Philistines make war against me. And God has departed from me and does not answer me anymore, neither by prophets nor by dreams. Therefore, I have called you, that you may reveal to me what I should do. Then look at Daniel chapter 2. And we don't have to read that. You understand Daniel, the interpretation of the dreams and all of these things. But look back at Matthew 1:20. And again, you've read this 7 times here recently, so we don't have to read that again. How did the angel of the Lord appear to Joseph? In a dream. Matthew 1:20 and chapter 2, verse 12. Now here's the interesting question, and I love this question. See, this is what I love about reading a lot. Hey, I've never thought about that before. I've never asked that question before. What do you think about this or that? In Matthew chapter 27, verse 19, when he was sitting at the judgment seat, his wife sent to him, saying, "Have nothing to do with that just man, for I have suffered many things today in a dream because of him." Question number 1, was Pilate's wife correct? Was she dreamed? Was she troubled? Yeah. Should she have been troubled by what was getting ready to happen to Jesus? Absolutely. That part was correct. Did Pilate believe it to be true? He did, and it's likely he would have taken this admonition if he hadn't already compromised with the enemies of Jesus. He was looking for a way out, wasn't he? And so, would it be appropriate to believe that the Spirit troubled Pilate's wife in her dream to ensure that it was a nation of Israel? Man, I don't know the why to it, but I certainly think it's appropriate to think that deity might have been involved in this. Anybody else have any thoughts in this dream? Did it with Joseph? Did it with the Old Testament with Daniel?
It wouldn't have been the devil.
That's right.
Activating them all.
Yeah. And so, we might say, well, she was thinking on this, was on her mind, it was worrying her, therefore she dreamed about it. That's a possibility as well. But I never thought about that being a reason to make sure that it wasn't Pilate alone who took the blame. It's an interesting... Yes, sir.
Caiaphas prophesied in their lives.
Yeah. It's possible. All right. What was your favorite part of the reading this week? Maybe something that you hadn't noticed before. And I probably should have told you about this last Wednesday so you could be ready. Anybody have anything that jumped out at them that maybe they hadn't noticed before that they'd like to share with the class? If we were in a smaller area, this would be so much better, but we are. Miss Marlene.
After Peter made his proclamation that he would never deny him, in that next verse, after Jesus said, "You will deny me," it says, "Even if I have to die with you, I will not deny you." And it says, "So said all the disciples."
Yeah.
So it wasn't just Peter.
You know how I picture that happening? If somebody makes a statement like that, if I make that statement to the Lord, though all others forsake thee, I never will. You know me, I never will. What would the rest of you do? You would jump on the bandwagon. That's how I picture that anyway. Of course, then the other ones say, "Yeah, let's do. Me too." But Peter was the first one to say it. He spoke adamantly about it, and then the others joined in and said it as well. But yeah, you're right. The rest did as well. Anybody else? If not, we can keep on going on with what I have. Next week, mark down your favorite thing. All right, let me go on to this, and we're going to go on to the book of Mark now. Like I said, this is very detailed, and the reason I did that is because since we can't cover it verse by verse in detail, hopefully this will help some. Let's look about the Gospel according to Mark. Tell me, and those in the men's class know all of this, so you better get the answer right. What was the name of Mark's mother? Acts chapter 12, verse 12. She had a large house in Jerusalem. They were gathered there. Mary. His mother was Mary. Mary. That's right, one of the Marys. He may have been the young man that fled naked. His cousin, as Brother Moshe just said, was Barnabas. Hopefully, Barnabas is fresh on our mind this week. We just learned about him or heard about him on Sunday. What happened to Mark on the first missionary trip? He left behind. How did Paul take that? Did not like it at all. How do we know that? Because got time for the second missionary trip.
He didn't want to.
No, he said, we will not take him. And there was a sharp contention. During the close of Paul's life, who was he asking to bring? Mark. See, there's another one. It wasn't just Peter who redeemed himself, so to speak. Mark was the witness. Are you going to make some tragic mistakes in your life? Have you made some tragic mistakes in your life? How many people want to amen that? Just kidding. But let me ask you this. Does that mean that you're worthless and God doesn't love you anymore and there's no hope for you? That's what Satan tried to tell us, but it's not true, is it? Look at Peter and look at Mark. Let me try to give you some things that maybe we haven't noticed about the Gospel of Mark. If you look in there, again, this was in our men's class yesterday as well. We went into a bit more detail, but Mark emphasizes the deeds of the Lord more than his words. He emphasizes the deeds. What do you like better from a person? What they say or what they do? Yeah, what they say after a while, if there's no doing, it loses its force, doesn't it? It loses its force. So Mark focuses on the deeds of Jesus, what he did. Here's some examples. 19 miracles in this short book. It's the shortest of the 4 gospel accounts, by the way. Only 4 parables in all of this. Compare that with Matthew and Luke, and you'll see a big difference in that. Luke has 1,151 verses, Matthew 1,071, John 879, Mark has 661 verses. You can read it out loud in an hour and a half. It's not bad, is it? It's a fast-paced gospel. Maybe this is what Mark is often overlooked in the gospel account, and that's just not right. It's got the best name of all 4, at least. But it talks about the deeds of Jesus. And this is what another wonderful thing about it. It's a fast-paced gospel. Listen to this. Over 40 times, he uses the word translated either straightway or immediately. 2/3 of the verses begin with and. So you see, and immediately, and straightway, and he did this, and he did that, and he did this, and he did that. Boom, 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 boom. You get all of these things, and you just get a big picture in a quick amount of time of some of the things that Jesus did. Let me give you 4 things. As far as, and this is another, I think, something easy to remember that will help us in our further studies of the gospel accounts. Fact, F-A-C-T. Write that down on something. F-A-C-T. Write it this way. So you took F and A, C, and a T. Fact. Fact. Matthew was written, and what's it about? It's about fulfillment. That's the F, in fact. Fulfillment. Jesus is the Messiah that was promised in the Old Testament. Matthew's about the fulfillment of all of those prophecies. Then we get to Mark. That's the A. Action. Jesus is a man of action. A suffering servant. A man of action.
What was the F for?
Fulfillment. Jesus is the Messiah promised in the Old Testament. That's Matthew. A is for action. He's a man of action. Jesus is a suffering servant. C is Luke. Compassion. Stresses Jesus' love for sinners and the marginalized of society. You know, I heard a while ago, a Christian sister just said, I feel like I'm a misfit, like I just don't belong. If I were her, I would really love the gospel account of Luke. You read that, and that's who Jesus focuses on. Let me just say this. We've got 2 more minutes or so. One of the biggest challenges, and you think about this in your job, in entertainment, and even in the church. We talk to people who we have a lot in common with. We talk to people who are just naturally outgoing. Maybe you come up and talk to us first and, carry on a conversation. But in every environment, like I said, work, entertainment, whatever, and even in the church, there are those who feel marginalized. That they feel like they don't fit in with everybody else. The challenge is to be like Jesus, especially when we read the gospel account of Luke. Look for those people, and because they're not going to come to you. We're going to have to go to them. That's one of the things I want to get better in 2020. And then the last one, John, is truth, fact. Fulfillment, action, compassion, truth. The truth that Jesus is the Son of God. All these things were written for what purpose? That you may believe that Jesus is the Christ, the Son of God, and believe you might have life in His name. That's right, John. So fulfillment, action, compassion, truth. And if you think about that when you read these accounts, and just look for those things, and man, you'll see that it is. As you read through now the gospel account of Mark, just notice those things, the ands, and immediately in straight ways. Watch how fast-paced it is. And then just look at all Jesus accomplishes in just 16 chapters in the shortest book. All right, let's get ready to worship God in our devotion period today.